It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Toni Holland, a lecturer in the Department of English. She'll be talking today about team-based learning.
I've been practicing team-based learning in the English department in my composition and literature courses. It has really vitalized the energy in the classroom, primarily because students are engaged in discussions with learning activities, active learning activities such as dialectic or exploratory problems that I present them in classes. So the discussions are much more rich, as are the engagement interaction among the students.
And so can you tell us just a little bit about how team-based learning works?
Yes, there are four primary principles of team-based learning. One of them is to place students in intentional and permanent learning groups. And what I found is that the discussion and the class activities are strengthened because the relationship strengthens as the semester goes along. So they work in teams from the beginning of the semester to the end, and so their bonds continually develop throughout the semester.
Okay, great. And so you've talked a little bit about how it's effective, and how do you feel about it as a teacher?
As a teacher, I really enjoy it. At the end of the semester, I had a lot of really strong positive feedback. One student told me that it was very refreshing, that she was excited that she and some other students were saying that they'd never had such exciting conversations about literature in the classroom, and that it was refreshing that they actually got to contribute to producing the meaning making in the classroom rather than, she said, being led like a donkey. So they really enjoyed it, and a lot of the other students in the literature classrooms thanked me for allowing them to have such amazing discussions, which they are the ones that developed the discussions. I just presented the problems in class.
So tell me a little bit about the problems that you developed.
Okay.
Were they hard to develop?
No, they were not hard to develop. I just would look for a set of poems or short stories and would ask problems based around them as discussion points to start the discussion, and then would ask them to look for evidence to back their claims and support about what they said. So it was actually also very text-rich in locating and searching for evidence to support their discussions. And what was also very rich was that after many of these discussions, we would end the class by more of a metacognitive discussion of looking at how did they arrive at the conclusions that they made. So they would go back and then think not just about the evidence that they chose, but they would think about the critical thinking skills of how they arrived at the decision making that they did, to look at their own thinking process.
Okay, so this method facilitated actually not just rote recall and comprehension, but a lot of analysis, evaluation, thinking about their thinking, and a lot of practice in reasoning.
Yes, the thinking about thinking was a very fun part of the class. I remember there was one classroom where I was writing the responses of different teams up on the board, and they had differences in how they had reached their conclusions, and they felt very strongly, and they were so excited about trying to get me to, it turned into kind of a debate, because once they realized to articulate how they arrived at the reasoning behind their process, then they were much more vested in the conclusion that they had arrived at. So those were very fun days. I was moving back and forth and writing all kinds of things on the board, and they were raising their hand, and so it was very active and high energy.
So the students really participate in their learning in this way.
They really do, and one of the benefits that I found from team-based learning is that before, I've done a lot of group work, but before it has been that I would give them some problems to work with, and the discussions would shut down. You know, I'd walk around the room and they'd say, "Oh, I'm done." You know, they had finished what I'd set out with them. But one of the other principles of team-based learning is process and summative evaluation feedback. So each module that we have, at the end of each module, students give a narrative performance of each team member ranking. And they know that at the end of the semester they're going to give a ranking that weighs in at 10% of their grade. And so they're vested in the learning process itself. And I think that that principle of team-based learning is what helped maintain and extend the discussions, because I wasn't getting responses like, oh, we're done with the discussion. They wanted to keep it going. And each team member was vested in the learning process, because at the beginning of the semester they were able to create their own summative evaluation criteria. So they each got to develop their own contract of how they wanted to interact as a team. So they chose different things such as being prepared, attendance, being respectful, being polite. And because at the beginning of the class I talked a lot about team-based learning and what it was going to be like and how it was going to be different from a regular lecture structured class. And they developed the criteria with which they wanted to interact as a group. So after each module they would give a narrative feedback based on that criteria, so they were able to negotiate the functioning of each team member.
So do you think talking about team-based learning at the beginning really helped them understand what was going to happen?
I think it is necessary, and I think it is a required, if someone wants to practice team-based learning, I think at the beginning there needs to be a lot of discussion about what it is, and also talking about why it's important and why the classroom is functioning the way it is, and why particular choices of the movement of class are created as they are, so that they understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Is there anything else specifically that you would like to say that stands out about team-based learning?
I would like to say that the feedback at the end of the semester, also one of the students' favorite aspects of team-based learning is that they got to give me feedback as well. So they would give each other narrative feedback, and they loved that they would give me feedback. I would leave the room and allow each team member to talk about the learning environment and what was working well with how I had structured the class and what I could do to improve the learning environment. And they loved that they could give me feedback, and then they would write a narrative account for me, and I would take them back into class and I would read them and discuss what was going well, and also discuss what I would change. And they loved that I was willing to change some things in classrooms. So they felt that I really cared about the classroom and cared about their learning, and they loved that I would, they called it, I was actively listening to them, and I was attuned to what I could do to enrich the learning environment, to do what I could do from their perspective to make it better. And they really appreciated that kind of flexibility on my part.
So it sounds like team-based learning gives the students some control, and they are also more responsible for their learning and accountable for their learning.
Yes, early in the semester, one of my favorite responses that I was getting is that they started taking on some of the concerns that I had had previously in other semesters. So for example, I used to say, oh, I wish my students were reading more, or I wish they were, prepared. But as I was walking around and interacting with the teams, they were the ones voicing those concerns. I wish my teammates were reading more. And I did find that the quality of the work was up. The reading definitely was up. More students were completing their outside work than they had been before. So that was very positive also.
Okay, so I know there are books out there on team-based learning. Michelson and Sweet have written a couple of different books for various disciplines, because it's not just for English. But would you be willing to share your expertise with other faculty at UT Arlington?
Definitely. They also have a website too, which could be an initial place people could go to learn more. There's a website in addition to the book you had mentioned. They can also contact me, Toni Holland, at tholland@uta.edu, and also the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.